Clone Lord, Primogenitor, Manflayer, Spider, Chief Apothecary, Lieutenant Commander, ultimately Fabius Bile. So, what's up, guys? CK 40K here, and this has been a video I've been very, very excited to make. It's been taking me a while because I've just finished the trilogy for Fabius Bile. So, yeah, if you're going to ask me what my qualifications are, I've tried to read every story that includes Fabius in any shape or form to my best effort I can. That includes Fulgrim, that includes Lucius the Eternal's Faultless Blade, and Primogenitor, Clone Lord, and Manflayer, A Memory of Thrasis, and Prodigal, I think. So I think it's safe to say I have a rudimentary understanding of the character that is Fabius Bile. So I don't think I need to really give an introduction to who he is, but I feel as though I should probably do it anyway because I'm already kind of talking about him and I'm excited and I just recently finished his whole trilogy and it was fun, so I might as well just get into it anyway. Fabius Bile is one of the most, if not the most, notorious man in the galaxy. This man has made friends and subsequently destroyed those friends within seconds. He is wanted by Drukhari, Eldari, the Imperium of Man, name it, really just name it. Chaos itself. He is constantly on the run, and yet he's needed by pretty much chaos to continue functioning. He makes soldiers. This is a man who makes monsters, who himself is a monster. He's just so interesting and complex, and yet it's pretty simple. It's like that one like meme where you see like where the people are describing Wolverine. Beast says he's like so simple, and someone says he's really complex. That really just sums up Fabius Bile. This is foremost one of the most scientific minds in 40K, if not the most scientific right now, besides maybe Belisarius Call. Just an interesting character all around. And before I even really jump into depth about what I want to talk about today, I highly recommend you go read just even those three books that I mentioned: Primogenitor, Clone Lord, Manflayer, because they are so just really good. They each really build upon each other, although I will say Manflayer was by far my most favorite out of the whole trilogy. So keep that in mind. I might dive into some spoiler territory, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to be spoilers, but I'm going to say for right now, if you haven't read the books, this might be a spoiler, so tread carefully, although I'll try to avoid some of the super major stuff, but I can't promise that because I constantly flip flop on what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So I've already described who he is. So why does Fabius Bile matter? Now, if you watch any sort of lore video on him, of course you'll realize this is the man who single-handedly saved the Third Legion. This man has an expertise in gene craft. He single-handedly forges the armies of chaos. He makes monsters. This is the Clone Lord. He is vital to the setting because he subsequently feeds chaos as a whole, not just Abaddon's army and not just various other war bands. He is the quintessential foundation, I would say, for, you know, chaos in a way. I'm not saying he's the sole proprietor that keeps them going, but he sort of is in a way. He's very just, monsters. He's got the foremost knowledge. If you need to know something about genecraft, second to the Drukhari, there is Fabius Bile. This is a man who knows what he's talking about. He's just so interesting. And not to mention, too, before you really get to know Fabius Bile, I always say this, well, I've been saying it recently. Secondary characters, I think, in most of these novels, really put an emphasis on the main character and who they are. So you can tell a lot by a character, not just by their monologues, but how they talk to other people. And some of Fabius's most significant interactions don't come with other Space Marines, I think, personally. I think they come from his creations, aka Melusine, his cloned daughter, who's now a sort of demon after Fulgrim snatched her and made her dance in the courts of Slaanesh, and then Igori, one of the first new men that he was creating. And the new men are sort of meant to be the next step in humanity. If you didn't know, they're supposed to replace humans as a biological, the next step. And it's interesting stuff, but I'm not going to go super deep into that. But the way he interacts with Melusine is just amazing, because this is a man who parades himself around with like the skin of like flayed people, and he just does diabolical evil stuff. And yet when he talks to Melusine, his clone daughter, you can see this weird shift. You can see this sentimental, empathetic, very like fatherly man. He cares for his creations, and if you read books, he knows that. He says a bunch of stuff like relating to that, and he'll always talk to her, and he'll say "my child," or he'll look at her and he'll smile, and he'll look at her, and they have such good talks, and it's so very, very interesting. While being on the topic of Melusine, he has this little quote, and I don't remember it off the top of my head because this was in an audiobook and I didn't clip it. But he's talking to Igori, and he wants, again, Igori's the first of the new men, and she's the oldest by far, and she's, basically dying, and he's like, I've missed you. It's like, why did you come back here? And she's like, I want to fight. And he's like, no, you need to leave with the rest of the new men, because there's a Drukhari raid going on, and it's pretty much threatening everybody there in the consortium and just every one of his creations. So he's doing this as like a fail-safe to save everybody. And there's just really touching moments with his creations, and I found that really amusing, because another character points out, and I think it was Narvo Quinn, points out that you've never had friends and you've never had brothers. And to a point, I would say that's pretty accurate, because he really only finds sentimental value in his creations, even though he also states earlier in the book he gladly sacrificed thousands for millions, millions for billions. So again, he is a double-sided, double-edged sword, if you will. He's horribly, pragmatic, cynical, even sociopathic. But then when it comes to his creations, again, Melusine, his daughter, he doesn't even call her a creation. He kind of evolves from that and calls her his daughter. He talks to her all whenever she's there, and he's like, why do you, do this to me? Why do you only speak in riddles? And of course, demons do that because demons experience reality on a different plane. The materium isn't linear like our time is. Things are happening all at once, right in front of the other, behind the other, so it's confusing. And she's like, I've only ever loved you, and this is the only way that you could survive, And it's just, I love the way he interacts with his creations, because you see a little bit of both. You see this evil man who obviously doesn't really care about what happens during his experiments, only the results, but you also see that he genuinely does have some compassion towards the things he creates at this point in the story anyway. And then flashing forward, there's also a bunch of members in the consortium, and if you don't know what the consortium is essentially the amalgamation of apothecaries that are either renegades or chaos aligned that really study under Fabius Bile and want to learn. So you have Sikara, who is a word bearer, who sort of follows Fabius because Fabius installed a bomb, I think, in his head or in his heart. And he's constantly preaching to Fabius how he serves the gods, and how Fabius himself unintentionally is probably the greatest servant of chaos, undivided. He serves Nurgle, Slaanesh, Khorne, Tzeentch. He just unequivocally, because the gods are so fickle, they get bored easily, and his creations constantly entertain. And that's true, and it's so true, because he constantly is making these grotesque creatures, and everyone remarks on it. Abaddon even wants him to make monsters for him. The Drukhari made him make some stuff in Kimura, and that was really interesting. There was also a really funny part in there where one of the Drukhari, I don't remember her name. I think her name it started with a D. She had like a glass, like not an eye patch, but like a monocle, and she would say, "It's a shame that he wasn't a Drukhari. He's so excellent. He would have made an amazing homunculus." And even the homunculus, his name was oh my god, what was his name? It was like, oh my god, I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll come back into it later and figure it out. But it started with P. and he was talking how he's proud of Fabius Bile, and he's like he learned quite a bit, even though he's rudimentary at best when it comes to gene crafting compared to the homunculuses and Drukhari in general. But just interesting stuff. I mean, he's amazing, and even then, there is. It's funny too because besides Sakara, there's Arian. Arian is a world eater who is constantly, doped up. And I say doped up, but he's got a bunch of stimulants and sedatives running through his system so the nails don't bite at him or he doesn't feel the nails. And he's basically his right hand man. Arian has been through it all with Fabius Bile, and he's constantly there. And he's this funny character because he and Sakara hate each other, but they both sort of read Fabius like a book. Because after Kimura, Sakara basically is like, you've been hiding. You're not the same innovator, creator. Something's been wrong. And he starts to realize Fabius is sort of gets this conflicted feeling that he's with. He understands that there's a game to play, and that is the great game. And everyone's got a role to play. Sakara, Arian, uh, even my favorite character, honestly, in this whole trilogy, anyone who's affiliated with Bile, Korag, Singe. This is a Death Eater apothecary, which is kind of strange in and of itself to think about this rotting, walking corpse on an apothecary. But the reason he's there is because he creates a bunch of diseases that Fabius Bile cures. So that way, essentially, he wants to create a plague that can no longer be cured, and Fabius just entertains him. But he's blessed by Nurgle. He's got this beast of Nurgle called like Pazuzu or Pazu, and he's a good fighter. And he also really reads Fabius, again telling him he's a servant of chaos, but also telling him you need to start making a decision because what you're doing right now is uncharacteristic of you. Because essentially, again, this is regarding not man, it is Manflayer, yes. He's hiding because the Drukhari are after him, and this is uncharacteristic because he's dealing with a lot. He's dealing with chaos, Abaddon. He's dealing with how do I deal with the Drukhari. So it's tough. He's in a tough spot, and we're seeing him fold as compared to the previous books where he had this goal. He had goals, and kind of transitioning into that, Fabius plays a role in quite a number of stories. And I'm not talking novels, I'm talking in universe, because a common trend that follows everything for Fabius Bile, he can't move forwards, he can't move backwards. And that horrifies the man of science. His only goal is to move forward. Only advance and create and innovate. And he can't do that. Why? Chaos doesn't want him to move forward. The whole point of the setting, right, is stagnation and the loss of knowledge and how we repeat the same mistakes. And he sort of does that, and he doesn't do that, but I'll touch up on that in a little bit. But besides, chaos playing a huge role in the motivations of Fabius and unintentionally guiding his actions, there's another faction who do so, the Harlequins. Through each book, and this is a slight spoiler, they guide him unintentionally through Oleander Co. and then through the Drukhari and then through other various events. Like the clone of Fulgrim. I don't know if they really had a part to play in that, but they're there. There's this one Harlequin, Veil Walker, who's constantly tuning strings and making sure Fabius makes these decisions. Going to Lugganoth, right? And then after Lugganoth, it's the Manflayer. It's making sure, he goes to Kamara, making sure they kill him, even though they don't really kill him. It's just, Hexakyries. Hexakyries is the homunculus I was thinking about. Oh my god, that was hard. I literally forgot, but this was going on, and this is so, again, he plays a role. He's a pawn, and that's a common trend in his story too. Melusine tells him this. Fulgrim himself tells him this when they meet in Manflayer. He is constantly, remember, Fabius's whole thing, he's a man of science, he's a man of, innovation, of logic. He's a staunch believer in the imperial truth. And when he confronts Fulgrim, because he needs help with the Drukhari, as many allies as he can get, and Melusine tells him he needs to go there to Pleasure's Pilgrim is where I think he's hiding out, is where Fulgrim is. He talks to him and he's like, you're just a slave, Fabius. You've always been a slave, And they have this really unique interact. Well, not unique, but it's very impactful to me because I really, when you see Space Marines and Primarchs interact, even the Chaos ones, the Primarchs exude this aura of control and like almost hypnotism, and Space Marines feel the need to oblige and believe. Fabius, on the other hand, hates his father brutally, brutally hates his father. He calls Fulgrim a slave. He says, "You've learned nothing. You're a fool, a broken tool." Fulgrim laughs and says, "I've always been a slave. I've been slave to the anathema, a slave to now the Dark Prince." But then, of course, we're really talking about an echo of Fulgrim, because this is not Fulgrim. This is more Slaanesh. And Igori, who is not Igori, I'm sorry. What was her name? Savona. Savona's Immortal Champion of Slaanesh that was found in Book 1 with the Joybound. I'll maybe touch on that. I don't really know if I will. And Savona kind of makes this comment where she says this is more of an echo, because she can feel that this is Fulgrim is essentially a vessel for Slaanesh to voice their wants and desires. And there he's talking about, you can't go forwards, can't go backwards. Fabius, you're my favorite because instead of your brothers making the same mistake all the time, you make new mistakes. It's just, and that really also, there's a weird balance because he brings up how he brought the Legion back, and Fulgrim says, "You've damned the Legion," and then it's just back and forth where Fabius says, "You've damned the Legion, you are my primogenitor," and interesting stuff. But again, I'm sorry, I kind of got off track with the roles, right? He's a pawn, so he's getting the help from Slaanesh, he's getting help from other war bands, and even a Titan Princeps. There's a lot going on. He always plays a role, and the role is important to him because for a man of innovation, can't go forwards, can't go backwards, always creating monsters. And he doesn't view it as that. At first, they're creations, they're his children, they are to thrive. But everyone just comments, "You're only capable of making monsters." And it just kind of always eats at him a little bit because he doesn't see it that way. So, So now jumping forward, something else I really want to touch on, and this video may be scattered, but I'm still trying to, there's a lot that's going into this because there's so much I really genuinely want to talk about. So moving on from his part in Chaos and the roles he plays in either the Harlequin's story or Chaos's story, I want to talk about the Emperor of Mankind. What about the Emperor of Mankind, Connor? Who cares? This is a Fabius Bile video, and you're right. But the parallels between the two are insane. And it's funny too, because before I get into this, I also want to say a lot of people have this misconception that because Fabius Bile is a staunch believer in the imperial truth, that he doesn't believe in the gods. He very much does, but he doesn't believe they're gods themselves. So a lot of people, I think, like to look at the excerpt where he basically meets Slaanesh and looks at Slaanesh and says, "You're not real." And it's a really Chad, it's like this cool, like super uber Chad moment, and everyone's like, "Whoa." I was like, "Whoa." But really, he was shitting bricks. His chirurgeon was injecting him with sedatives and keeping his heart from collapsing, and he was afraid. And then moving further forward now in the story, he acknowledges that the gods are present, in his life. They dictate some of his actions, but he doesn't call them gods because they're not. To him, they're fluctuations of sentience in the warp, amalgamations of warp essence or of consciousness or whatever he says. And the Emperor sort of thinks the same. So there are no gods, I think, therefore I am. You do not think, therefore you are not. Interesting stuff. But really, how you can see these parallels between the two characters is the way they interact with their children or their tools. Obviously, a lot of the Traitor Primarchs really have this perspective, and for the most part, it's not it's not like a wrong perspective to have. It's very valid. The Emperor disregarded them and treated them as defective tools. Fabius Bile has done the same with his creations, and also has done the same with Fulgrim himself. You're a broken tool. You did not serve a purpose, you know, you're a slave, all that. And then again with the gene crafting creation, the Emperor was creating, you know, Thunder Warriors. When the Thunder Warriors didn't work out, Space Marines, and then the Custodes were always present as companions, all that. And Fabius Bile, of course, was the New Men. And then when it wasn't the New Men, he was creating, you know, mutants. And you know, they're creative innovators. They're staunch atheists. And then a little spoiler. Well, not for the Emperor. The Emperor is basically a god, and now so is Fabius Bile, albeit a minor kind of deity in the warp. He is essentially a god, and he does not enjoy that, of course, because at the end of Manflayer, he's essentially dead, but not really dead. He's in this catatonic corpse-like state where all of his clones are sentient and moving and thinking and acting as him. He puts it in the story as this: he is me, and yet I am not him. They're all sort of lucid, but he is like the main factor. He's a spider, and these other clones are his web, and they're moving, and it's so interesting. And much like the Emperor has a vast web, aka the Astronomicon, and reaching out to Gilliman and other saints, saving planets. You know, they both are what they despised: gods, because gods do not exist. Only logic exists, and only logic dictates henceforth what decisions I shall make. I think, therefore I am. So just very, very interesting stuff, and it's just amazing. It really is. And I may be rambling. That's only because, really, if you've consumed the books, you'd understand why, because there's a lot to touch on. There's, again, I said, the duality of who he is. This caring man minus this cruel man who threatened to expose his father to agonies he had not yet even begun to conceive. Just very interesting stuff. So I've talked a lot about Fabius, you know, comparisons with the Emperor, you know, some of the characters he's interacted with, and just who he is. But there is one more thing I really do want to touch on. So the last thing I wanted to focus on was Fabius's relationships. Now, again, this isn't a typical lore video. This isn't going to be an hour and 45 minutes of me going through his whole life story. I'm not very good at that. That's not my thing. I like to analyze characters, and when I read about characters, I like to pick apart parts of them I could identify with, and you know, there was a lot and a little I could almost assuredly say there are only a certain amount of characteristics I think I could even remotely say I would share with Fabius Bile. And before we go into that, relationships. So as I said previously, Narvo Quinn, you have no friends, Spider, and you have no brothers. So Fabius Bile may not have friends, but people certainly are friends with Fabius Bile. Although there is a power imbalance in this relationship, he definitely is more of a people person than I think he lets on. When he talks to Savona, Savona is a hedonist. She is pretty much the antithesis of Bile. Bile seeks perfection, obviously, but only in creating, not this obsessive nature that most Marines of the Third have. The Third take it to new extremes. He, like Fulgrim says, makes new mistakes all the time instead of the same mistakes. He makes new mistakes. And Savona is just really only focused on indulging herself in all sorts of pleasure, not just one. She wants to just experience things and live lavishly and consume lavishly. And they start off with a really rocky relationship because she's essentially killed a Chaos Space Marine, took their armor, grew to their height, and she just constantly calls him old man and mocks him and gives him fake salutes like, "You got it, dude. Whatever you want." And towards the end of Manflayer, she's very, you know, almost like not another daughter, but they're more familiar terms, and he's smiling as he ushers her off to basically what would be her death. And even with Sakara and Arian, two people who really don't like him but respect him, these relationships grow, especially with Sakara, the man who essentially is a preacher. This is a word bearer. He serves the gods, not Fabius. But as he stays with Fabius, as he goes through these books with him, he realizes that maybe this is the god's will to help Fabius, to stay with Fabius. And he even kind of talks to Fabius about this. He says, I've disarmed the bomb you put in me 9 decades ago, like years and years ago. I stayed. And he's like, why did you stay? Because I think the gods will it, and because you provide them with entertainment, and I will never be rid of you. Even though he really despises Fabius, he is sort of almost enamored with him because of what he represents to the gods, which is, their interests. And poor Arian. Arian would do pretty much anything for Fabius Bile, and the way he goes out is truly, brutal, because, he's fighting and he lets the nails finally bite into him, and it's brutal stuff. But he often, looks to Arian, and he shares, secrets and feelings with Arian, and he's expressive with Arian, and again with his children, with Igori, with Melusine. He's a father. He's not this evil scientist who creates and destroys and leaves worlds to die and others he saves so they owe him. He treats them like daughters. He misses them. He reminisces. He misses Melusine all the time. If I'm remembering correctly, this may have been a memory of Thrasis. He's missing Melusine. He desperately, desperately wishes she didn't leave. And whenever she visits him, he looks at her and he's proud of her. Even Igori, he's proud of Igori. Igori has grown, and of course, like any father, he's worried. You don't want your children to leave you, but you realize in order for them to grow, you have to let them go. And it's a hard thing to do for anybody. I may not have kids, I'm 20, but I understand the emotional impact this could have on anybody. And for a Chaos Space Marine, a man who constantly commits atrocities, war crimes, things that are so disturbing that even Abaddon is perturbed, he still has paternal instinct in a way over his creations. He misses her. He constantly just talks about her, reminisces about her, and is proud of her in his own way. And Igori as well. Igori has lived way farther than she should have. She's the first of the new men. She's lived for centuries almost, and she's just pretty much dying. She's got scars on scars. She's broken. She's laid dying, and yet she still finds a way to reach him and talk to him and tell her, you want what you want, but you don't want me to be free. She said, you, benefactor, need to let me go and make my own decisions. And to a point he does, and it's just so visceral and guttural to me, because to most people, I don't know if the scenes with Igori or Melusine are important, but to me, they really highlight his character and who he is. He's an innovator, he's pragmatic, he's empathetic, and yet sociopathic and cunning and evil. And yet he still cares about his mutants, his creations, to a degree. And he feels genuine remorse and sadness, and he feels bitter about them. And it's interesting to see, because I think a lot of people would like to believe that Chaos makes boring characters that only fulfill the desires of their gods or their own overall goals, and there's nothing wrong with that. Being a single-minded and a linear character is entertaining, to me at least, and I think to a bunch of people, because then you don't have to worry about complexities and, oh, this person is this type of person, and you don't have to worry about this character getting video essayed to death. But Fabius Bile is anything but linear, even though he cannot go forward and cannot go backwards. To me, he's not a tragic character, because he doesn't feel sorry for himself. He just feels trapped, which is understandable. He is trapped, but he is also aware of what he's doing. He's not someone you should feel bad for. This is a man who sends countless of his creations off to death. The agonizing deaths. He lets friends die if they serve a purpose, because to him, they may be friends, but they're also tools. He'll feel bad. A broken tool sucks, because then you have to go get a new one. And what if you really like that tool and it's been with you for a really long time, but it's time to move on? So I know this again, this was basically me just talking about Fabius and, the man with the plan. But this was a very interesting book, a double set of books, and really Fabius Bile is very interesting in general. So I know I'm missing some bits and pieces of him. I haven't read a lot of books including him. I really have only read 3 and then basically 2 more short stories. So, and including Lucius the Faultless Blade, where he kind of makes an appearance. So we can make that 4. So I understand I'm missing something. I know I haven't read Gene Father. I haven't read a bunch of other stories including him. Obviously, I'm missing some stuff, so maybe this isn't the full picture. Nonetheless, I just wanted to get the video out because it wasn't, it was important to me because this was a good book. It was good watching him grow and yet simultaneously stay the same, as is a trend with the setting and even chaos to a degree. It was fun. It was very fun. It was very, very interesting. I know what you're thinking, Connor. You really said a lot, and this was very good and interesting. But what else? Is there anything else you really want to leave with Fabius Bile on the table? No, because no matter what I say, you need to go read it, I think, personally. You need to form your own opinion and go read really anything with Fabius Bile. Because the side stories and the excerpts you see, I don't think really do him justice. I really think when you read these excerpts, you're missing a lot of the context that surround these sort of very emotional and pivotal moments in his life. And when you read these stories like Memory of Thrasis or Prodigal, like they kind of fill in context as well as you keep getting new perspectives and everything is constantly evolving and yet staying the same. So again, please, if you can ever, it doesn't have to be now, it doesn't have to be a year from now, it could just be whenever is most convenient. Try the books, give them a try, because genuinely, he's an interesting character. He's not just evil scientist, he's far more than that. He is indeed an evil scientist, but he's also a father. He's also an innovator. He's also a tortured soul, and he's just basically the emperor if the emperor wasn't a god. Well, I guess no. They're both gods in their own way. He's basically the emperor if the emperor wasn't in such a high position of power and never wanted to be the emperor, but instead a scientist. So, well, I guess the emperor did want to be a scientist, but you get what I mean if you do, you know. But yes. So that being said, please read the books, and I'll think. Is there anything else I really want to talk about when it comes to Fabius Bile? I don't think so, off the top of my head. So I may end the video here. So thank you for watching. And of course, if I missed anything, if there's some books you'd want to point out to me, or, there's context I was missing, or you want to fill me in on a character or story, let me know. Fill it in, put it down in the comments. I read all my comments. I promise I do. It's just, this is finals week, so I kind of, there's a lot going on there, but I will read them. I love hearing people's opinions, and I love also when people have different opinions. I don't mind that. I enjoy when people have a different perspective from me, because then I can go reread and I can go try to see from that perspective. So yes, I'm over. It's done. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, thank you. And if you liked the video so much you want to hear more nonsensical ramblings of me talking about characters I truly enjoy, consider staying around and subscribing. Other than that, I am out of here. Thank you guys.